Go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to A New View. I'm Shira, and I'm here with Kim, Lee, and Juji. We are four friends, speakers, and professionals from different cultures, backgrounds, and age groups coming together to offer healing and inspiration. Our special guest today is my friend and colleague, Jason Sirois. Jason is a strategist, organizer, facilitator, storyteller, and learner committed to creating opportunities for people to connect authentically across differences. For close to 2 decades, he has partnered with schools, colleges, universities, corporations, nonprofits, and community organizations across the globe to create more equitable environments. Jason is the co-host of the podcast In Pursuit of Cross-Racial Friendship and a co-organizer of Constructive White Conversations, a gathering space for white people committed to getting comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations necessary to dismantle the violent systems of white supremacy and racism in the U.S. So Jason, we like to start off with a question that we ask all of our guests. What is the best compliment you have ever received?
I feel like first, can I have a minute to just acknowledge when you hear your bio read, like said, you're like, that's pretty good. Like, I'm okay. That's the best compliment I've ever gotten. Complimenting myself. I think that I guess it's not such a traditional compliment. It wasn't like you're talented or something, but this is a story I tell a lot. And I guess it was in 2008, I was one of the facilitators for a program the New York City Department of Ed was doing for their educators around creating classrooms where LGBTQ youth could thrive, like creating equitable classrooms for LGBTQ youth. So I'm a gay man. I was co-facilitating with a gay woman, and it was a 2-day training. And every time we would start, because teachers wouldn't know why they were coming. And then in our intro, we were like, we're here to talk about lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer and questioning youth. And inevitably you would see teachers. I mean, you would think in New York City that wouldn't throw anybody, but it did. And in this one day, there was a teacher in the space, an older man, and he was identified as Orthodox Jewish. And it's important to understand like his age, and because I think it contextualizes the experience. And fast forward to the first morning, we're talking about language. We get to homophobia. We define it, and he raises his hand and says, is it homophobic if I don't want to be touched by gay people? And he says it like with a tone, like he does not want to be there. And as I like pulled it in all my training, and I was like, well, what if we change the word to Catholic? And I don't want to be touched by Catholics. And he said, well, I don't have a problem with Catholic people. And then like another man jumped in and talked about how gay people always hit on him, and he just wants to take a bat and hit him upside the head. And I was like, so I looked at my co-facilitator. She took over because I needed a minute because I was about to take a bat. And I mean, not really, but it was hard to hear that. And fast forward, we did 2 days. This man ended up not saying much more, but he sat there for 2 days with his arms crossed and just didn't participate. And at the end of the second day, we always end with like a circle. People just share one thing they're taking away. And when we got to him, he was sitting next to me. He was the last person. And he said, it's really hard to talk when I'm about to cry, but this has changed my life. And totally gets me emotional now because it's so shocking because I thought he like wanted to take a bat. So he just said how he feels horrible about the 30 years of LGBT youth who he may have had that didn't feel safe in his classroom. He was looking forward to going home and talking to his children and his family about this. And then the best part was that the compliment really came when we were done and people were saying goodbye, and he came up to me and apologized for any offense he caused. And then he went to shake my hand, and then instead he gave me a hug. And like, this is a man the day before who was like, I don't want to be touched by gay people.
Oh, God.
It was like, yeah, I was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Oh my God, Jason, I can't believe that story.
Have I never told you that story, Shira?
No. Oh, yeah, you told me. That's why I'm like a mess.
I think we're all tearing up over here, like all of us. That's incredible.
Yeah, that was
it's life changing. It's huge.
Yeah, and so you
Wow.
know, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. It still gets me every time because it was.
All right, I think this is a good place to wrap.
Get the tissues.
Holy cow. Yeah, first of all, I got chills all over my body before you even said that he hugged you. So then when you said that he hugged you, I was just like, I
know. I was like, oh my God, holding it together too. And then when he left, I had my own moment of like, because it was healing as a gay man.
Yeah, there's something about opening up as human beings. Like you literally feel your whole body just opening up and inviting something new in. And I just think that's such an amazing place to set the stage for what we're going to talk about. Because I feel so open right now. I really do.
And Shira, if I can just add to that, there's something so powerful when you know, have this type of career and are in this type of movement, and you actually see the impact. Because not often do you know, my sister's a teacher and she doesn't often see the impact, but once in a blue moon, when she has a student who comes to her and expresses something so beautiful and of gratitude, she's just like, it's, you know, to see it is like a whole other thing. So that's incredible. But
also on top of that, for the gentlemen to have said, I'm going to go back and have a conversation. So now you know that whatever you've done is now impacting other people. It's like a ripple effect. Amazing. Yeah. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that amazing story.
Yeah.
So we're going to start off by asking you, how did you become a cause for change in this area of racism?
I mean, I was an actor for a long time. So I didn't even know what I do exists, to be honest. And as a white man growing up in white suburban Connecticut, I knew racism existed, but it felt like a historical thing. Like it was in the 60s kind of thing. Never self-reflective of like the fact that I live in an all white, predominantly white community and what that even means and how that's racism. But I think being gay, I was bullied from literally kindergarten until I graduated high school every day. I think it made me self-reflective, made me reflective of other people, trying to understand why people would treat me that way. So I think I had a genuine curiosity to try to, for a while, it was just like create a world where other kids like me, gay kids, who wouldn't go through what I went through. But when you get into that work, you start working with people who are Black, Latina, Hispanic, Asian American. Like you work with a diverse group of people, which for me was relatively new, especially coming from the theater world, which is, notoriously white-centered. You start realizing that you can't get away from race and racism when you talk about any form of oppression. And my curiosity then, I just started reading, I went to workshops, and everything I learned was like, the more you learn, what is that saying? The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Mm-hmm. My band teacher had that in her band room. And at the time I was like, please, but now, oh, that's what that means. I get it.
How true it is.
Yeah. And so I think I have a genuine desire to create a world where everybody can thrive. And I think it's based on my own experience. So I'm not comparing my oppression. I'm not saying it's worse than anybody else's or comparing it to racism, but I think it gave me the drive to create a better world.
Zhuge, sounds like you have a question.
Yeah, obviously, because you had the experience of ways in which you were singled out and bullied and things like that, and then you start like learning more through this organization, what to you is the difference between like intellectually understanding aspects of racism and then like really seeing how it plays out with the people in your life? Because for me, I feel like that was the big aha moment. Like, obviously I know racism exists, and then you see your friends of color being treated differently and you're like, oh, this is what it really looks like.
I mean, I think you just said it. I think why I smiled when you said like intellectually get it is because so I've been doing this work, it's, almost 2 decades in one way or another, and not always anti-racism. Anti-racism is relatively new. And I have to say, it's the last year, this podcast that I did with my friend, I thought I was like so far ahead. I was like the woke white person. And she just casually once said, I don't even know if it's on the podcast or she just said it. She was just like, I mean, being with you at the beginning of your journey, I was like, huh? I have been doing this. And I think that's exactly what she meant, is that I theoretically understood, right? I could talk about it, but I wasn't feeling any of it. I wasn't internalizing it. Like after a conversation like this, I then would go to the movies and and it's not that I can't live my life and have fun, but I think the biggest thing is it's not even like feeling and empathizing with my friends of color. It's actually reflecting on how white supremacy lives in me. That's where I started internalizing it, rather than it just being a thing that someone once said to me, a Black woman who I just really admire. She said, you keep talking as if you're outside of the problem, helping fix it, as opposed to you being inside the problem. Like you are the problem. And I was like, okay, I'll have to go think about that. But that, I think, it's like a convoluted answer. Did that answer your question?
It did. I mean, it feels very much like if somebody said that to me, I'd be like, I don't like it. I don't like it.
Oh yeah, I think I did that exact move. Yeah, at least inside. And I continue to do it, even though I do this work. In that podcast, you hear me silent a lot because I'm like, oh my God, I just got totally called out.
Can I ask a clarifying question real quick on the heels of what you guys just talked about, with what you both just talked about? My question is, how do we, because the way you just phrased it, Jason, where you're like, I'm not outside the problem, I'm inside, I am the problem. I immediately go to, yeah, but that's going to make people feel defensive. Like I'm not the one with the problem. So are there ways to phrase that don't necessarily sound blamey shamey? Or do we just have to go there? Like, no, you are part of the problem.
I think the way to phrase it is the way I did it. I'm inside the problem. And then go, what do you think about that? Are you inside the problem?
Inside the problem.
That's the work that I do. I really try not to assume anybody's experience or how they're feeling. There's a lot of, if you just read White Fragility, there's some basic stuff that white people do in response to being accused of being the problem. So you can count on that. I experience it. But I read that book and I was like, that's, you don't know me, but you do.
Yeah.
So but I think I'm not being very clear. Let me try this.
No, you actually are, because the phrasing that you just used, I'm inside the problem, that's actually really good.
Yeah, because then it's about me. I'm not saying you are.
Right.
Hopefully, I'm creating a space where you can go, am I inside the problem? And then we'll talk about it.
So Jason, that's very inspiring to me to think of it this way, because I never have, like, am I part of the problem? But my question to you would be, when do you feel, or do you feel at this point, having done what you've done and where you are today, do you still feel like you're part of the problem? Because I mean, I would never think of you as part of the problem doing what you're doing and making such an impact on people's lives. I would say you're part of the solution. And when are we not part of that problem?
Really great question. Okay. I do think I'm part of the problem. Inherently, as a white man, especially, I'm still, and I'll get into that in a second. But the way you just said, you see me as part of the solution, I think I'm also part of the solution. And one of the things I've learned about white supremacy and racism is that there's an either or thinking, like binary, you're either this or you're that. And your question just made me, it was a great reminder, like, oh no, you can be both. And so I am committed to being part of the solution, but I am still part of the problem.
But why are you still part of the problem if you are doing so much good about this and being such a part of the solution? Why do you need to be on both ends when maybe perhaps you're a lot more on one end than the other?
I think it's because I don't get to define if I'm the problem or not. People of color in my life are telling me I'm still part of the problem. In that, I'm still centering myself in a lot of my interactions. I'm still like, I have friends I have very loving friends who are Black and people of color. And it's funny, I don't say Indigenous because I don't think I have any Indigenous friends, at least not that I know of. But let me take a step back and say this. So what's coming up for me when you ask me that question, Lee, is that one of the challenges of being part of the solution, like real solution, dismantling systems. I really do think that we all need to be working towards dismantling systems that are maintained today by, I'm part of those systems. That's how I'm part of the problem. And one of the challenges of being a white person who does what I do is there's a very low bar for white people to be anti-racist. And so because I'm outwardly doing it, everyone's like, you're amazing. White people are like, you're amazing. So I took on that. I was like, I'm amazing. I am saving the world. And then Eva doing this podcast was like, you're at the beginning. And I was like, what? But every white person tells me I'm amazing. I mean, I went through a whole phase of dating. This is getting really personal. Dating men who I had to like coach them to break up with me because they weren't attracted to me, but they were attracted to me being a good white person. And literally I had a man, I remember a man, this is so bad. We went out, he got way too drunk and was like throwing up and I'm rubbing his back. He goes to me, I want to be attracted to you. You're such a good person. Okay, I think this is over. But keep throwing up. I'll keep rubbing your back. The point is that it's like when you do that, well, I'll speak for myself. I don't have to do very much for other white people to think that I'm amazing and that I'm anti-racist. So I really use BIPOC people in my life as the gauge. And I still feel based on my interactions. No one says, Jason, you're the problem. But I can tell that it's still work to be in relationship with me. I still am benefiting from the systems. I'm still, so like, it's not a judgment. I don't think I'm a bad person at all, but I'm still in the problem. But I appreciate that question a lot. No one's ever asked that. So I never had to, I don't know if that made sense the way that.
Yeah.
It does. It does. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Jason, I loved listening to your podcast. I tuned in to one specific episode about holding space, and what you guys are talking about right now, I feel like I literally listened to on the call with you and Eva. And it's so interesting because your honesty and confusion and unawareness about certain things. Like, you're just so genuinely honest about it with her on the calls. So I can see when you talk about like, oh, my white friends think that I'm amazing. And then, here's Eva telling you like, no, you're at the beginning of your journey. Like I physically can hear that on the calls.
Yeah.
There was one episode, like I said, about holding space that really, really made me go away and think about how I hold space for not just my friends of color, but like everybody in my life. And it really took you back when Eva described what holding space meant for her, like coming from you, and she described the definition of what that means. I could just hear in your voice, you were really taken back, and you're like, wow, I really need to go away and think about this and digest this and process this, as did I. So I would love if you can just touch on, because the first question I have in my mind listening to all of this is like, well, how? Like, how do I hold space for my friends of color? How do I, be part of the solution more? Besides spreading love, I love loving, and I love, doing anything I can to love people and help people become better people and work on themselves and take care of themselves. But when you ask me, like, I really don't know what else I can do. I want to learn. And that's why I loved having you on today. I want to learn how to be part of the solution more when it comes to racism. So maybe would you mind just delving into that episode a little bit and, sharing what Eva's definition was of holding space, what that meant for you?
Yeah, I mean, what I really took away when Eva said, like, what holding space meant, the thing that stuck with me and made me go, oh, I don't do that, is listening without needing anything. In this case from Eva. So like I would just listen and then I would validate. Like we would, after Eva finishes sharing whatever she's sharing, I would go, wow, that's a lot. And we would just live in that moment. What I tend to do, and I still have to have a conversation, this gets into like, what can you do? I can only talk about what I do and if that resonates with you. And to be very clear, I call myself a learner. I'm definitely not an expert on this, but I have committed to just sharing my experience in hopes that it inspires other people. So to be very clear, if anyone's listening, I am not a guru here, like with some, tried and true practices. But what I realized I did is I showed up to every interaction and I didn't realize this until the conversation with Eva. I showed up in every interaction with, what do I get out of this? Like I showed up with my needs to every interaction. And in many ways, I still do that. The difference now is after that conversation, I consciously am like, stop thinking about what you want or what you're learning in this moment or whatever, and just listen. So inevitably I miss a little of what they say because I have to have that conversation. And then I have been practicing about like just sitting there. It is so not natural for me. Part of how I am part of the problem of racism and white supremacy is that I grew up as a white man with what I thought everyone grew up with. The belief that everything I have to say is worthwhile. And so what I know now is not everybody has that. And it's not just race, it's gender. It's all like, there are a lot of elements to that. And so I have to practice not thinking that everything I have to say is valuable to the other person, is important, or that my learning is going to be learning for them too. Because that's how I always approach, like Eva would say, this is what I experienced. And I go, you know what that makes me think? That makes me think I can relate to that. And I thought that was good relationship. And so
that's exactly what I do too.
Yeah. And so what I heard her say is, I don't care. I just need to know that you heard me. Because the minute I go, you know what I learned? She has to switch to being the listener. And she actually knows how to do that. So it is a lift for her to be there for me. So it just upended my understanding of being in relationship with other people. And I think in that episode, I go, I'm not sure I am in relationship with anybody. I don't hold space for anybody now. And so ever since then, I'm like, that was definitely, I'm glad that connected with you, because it shattered my understanding of relationships and how I show up in these spaces.
It completely impacted me. I find myself still thinking about it every day. And even just hearing you said what you just said, I'm like, I'm a little wowed right now. Like I need some time to digest. But you know, one of the hows I just realized listening to you is listening and leaning into that uncomfort and just leaning in and letting the moment be uncomfortable. I think I avoid that so much. I'm sure a lot of people do, especially in those intense moments where, let's say, you know, and I would hear it. I would hear it in your episode. I'm sure all of them are like that. I'm sure you have moments like that a lot with her.
Oh,
where
yeah.
She says something and it just takes you a moment, and it's uncomfortable. But you sit there and you feel the uncomfort, and that's one of your hows. That's one way of being a part of the solution.
I mean, I'm going to be really honest with you. In the moment, the biggest challenges in the podcast that I couldn't understand until after we were done recording was that it was very hard for me to feel things. I stayed in my head. It goes to your point, Gigi, the question that you asked. I was very intellectual about it, because what I realize now is I showed up as a learner, like, Eva, give me everything you have. So when she shared personal things, I wasn't there for her. I was processing, but she would always go, how does that make you feel? And every time she asked me that, you can hear me go, I mean, it's like, because I was like trying to make this leap to my heart and I couldn't make the leap. And so now I just try to show up when someone's talking. I just try to be there. And what I realize, I keep forgetting what I'm going to say. And that's a sign that I'm doing it better. Because I'm not thinking about what I'm, like, I had a thought when they were talking. By the end of it, I'm like, wait, there was something I was going to say, but I don't, means I was listening. I'm taking that as a cue that I'm doing it better.
That's great.
Yeah.
Juge?
I was just wondering if you could share something that you learned that was just so shocking to you that it like just never occurred to you that was like a thing that was a problem. Because I mean, I have examples from my life and I just, it's always it's always a small thing, right? Like, is there a small example that you can give us of something that you learned that you had no idea existed?
Well, I'll share something that Eva said to me, not in the podcast. It was leading up to the podcast. It's why we were like, maybe we should have these conversations with other people might be able to learn from this, because I was getting so much from it. And I think she was too. And we're about to put out blog posts. Each of us wrote a blog post about why we did the podcast, because we are getting feedback from people that, like, especially Eva, like, why did you do this? This was like white man therapy. Why? And so anyway, one of the things she said that knocked me out, and this is why I love Eva, because she says stuff that makes you go, huh? And she's just saying it in casual. I was talking about something about my own self-reflection on racism and white supremacy. We were at a diner. The server came over, took our order, and then I went, okay, what were we talking about? And she said, you were talking about being complicit in the system of white supremacy. And I was like, is that what I was saying? That's not what I was saying. And so, like, we had this moment where I was like, that is it. I'm complicit. That's when I learned, really internalized, I'm part of the problem. That I'm complicit every day. Like, I just had a meeting with a financial advisor, and I'm gonna, like, I think capitalism in many ways, I mean, I don't want to get into the history and everything, but slavery, capitalism, banking, all of that, problematic. Not like, it doesn't have to be problematic. I just think in the US, the more I learn, the more I'm like, oh, you can't get away from racism and white supremacy. You can't separate that from our form of capitalism. And yet here I am totally investing my money into what I think is problematic, because that's what we do. And and I said it to the financial advisor. He said, he said, are you loyal to any of your institutions? I'm like, I'd rather not be with any of you, but I don't know how else to do it. So I'm gonna do it. And I think he was taken aback. He was like, oh. And so that was my little pushback, and just naming it, but then I did it. So the complicity thing blew my mind.
That is super duper interesting. I have a question for you about any advice you have. And obviously this is not like a 2-second, like, what's your advice for X? And then you're like, here's the advice, goodbye. But when someone has racism sort of deeply rooted in their family, how does someone go about addressing, approaching, handling, dealing with that?
It kind of goes to one of the other things we talked about already, which is, I think you have to set boundaries. I think there's a culture of silence in white families that we don't talk about racism and white supremacy. And so I think the first thing is just to normalize conversations about it without judgment. It's not like to have conversations that's not good and bad. It's like, this is, what do you think? But I think it's really important. For me, I've learned about myself that the more I learn, the harder it is to be in relationship with white people who aren't on the same journey of like learning about racism and white supremacy. And there's this author, somebody who I co-organized the Constructive White Conversations with, who started it. He wrote to our author, Joseph Brandt, who wrote Dismantling Racism, about constructive white conversations, because he just loved this author. And he was like, he got the courage to write to him. And he said what Constructive White Conversations was about. And Joseph Brandt, supposedly, this is like me telling you from what I heard, the email said, sounds like you're learning to love white people. And it blew his mind. But when he shared it with me, it blew my mind too, because I so easily want to separate myself so I can be like, no, BIPOC people, I'm not one of those white people. So what I've learned in terms of family, because I have family who, it's very hard to talk about this, who, are definitely, racism is over in some cases. I try my best not to judge and to keep developing a relationship and talk about it. I'm not good at it. I actually don't bring it up a lot with my family, racism and white supremacy. It's one of the things I still feel guilty about and ashamed, because here I am, you're all asking me like, oh, you do that. And I'm like, listen, people, I am a person who has not figured this out. And this is one of the ways I haven't figured it out, because it's scary, the thought of losing family who don't want to talk to me because I'm the person who can't stop talking about racism. So I just try to develop relationships, try to ask questions as much as I can and not lecture. And someday they may come around. So I don't know if that really gives you much, but.
No, but something you said actually, because you and I have worked together. And so the term white supremacy, I think also tends to throw people off, because I think if you're in the work, it has a couple of definitions, but to the world at large, it's just like the white supremacist, the Ku Klux Klan, just like a very extremist form of it. But I think when you speak about it, it's different. It's more about the systems that are in place that, sorry, are we good? Oh, so is using that terminology something that we should be aware of?
Yeah, it's a really great point. I actually don't think I've ever said white supremacy to my family. I don't think I say racism very often. I talk about the systems and the behavior. Like I talk about redlining and the history of redlining. I talk about the actual forms of racism and white supremacy that I know and understand and can speak to. So you're right. Like, I'm using, and I share you and I have talked about this. I always say lowercase w, lowercase s.
Yeah.
Like, we're not talking about KKK here. We're literally talking about the systems that benefit white people, that were built to benefit white people. That is what I mean by white supremacy. But yeah, great point. I don't use the language because that is the turn switch. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think this is a really great place to wrap up part 1. We hope you enjoyed our conversation as much as we did with Jason. And we are going to be coming back for part 2, where Jason's going to take us through the work that he does through the organization Constructive White Conversations. We have some links to websites and social media. And if you enjoyed the show, please click like and subscribe to our channel. Tell a friend, spread the word. Please also let us know if you have any comments or questions, or if there's a topic you would like to see us cover. We will see you soon. Stay safe, everybody.